Welcome to another episode of the BOM podcast, and we are super privileged today to be speaking with the guy who literally wrote the book on the music industry in South Africa. Composer, music producer. He's also a creative industries consultant. He's a lecturer, and the list goes on. And also, as I said, the author, Mr. Jonathan Shaw. And
so much.
Jonathan, welcome.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me and having me virtually. I know that's how things are going these days.
Well, virtual is the way to go. And from myself, Lucas de Beer, and Helmut Meyer, your hosts for the BOM podcast this week, it's great to have you on the show today.
So much.
Yeah, thank you. And Jonathan, from my side, what a privilege.
Oh, what a privilege to meet you guys again. And thank you so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's dive straight in.
Yeah.
Jonathan, what made you write this book? And let's just show it to the camera here, the South African music business. What is the story behind writing this book?
Sure. So I suppose, like all good stories, that when there wasn't anything, one has to think about what you can contribute to help get this message out into the industry. The book story starts really back in 2004, 2003, somewhere around there, where we started. When I say we, I had my friend who helped me publish the book eventually. She had recorded an album with me way back then, and we had started attending various conferences and just industry gatherings and chatting to people in the industry. And I was lecturing on a very brand new course about music business at the time. And one of the things that we kept on, bumping into was the fact that a lot of people just didn't have knowledge about our industry in particular, and knowledge about music. And a lot of it was myths and mysteries and, international conventions, which didn't really apply in South Africa. And so we had to put together some sort of resource to fill that gap. And it really comes from when it was one of the ways that I found I could stay in the industry. So when I wanted to find out more information, it goes back to wanting to work with a particular artist. And we tried to sketch out the terms under which we would be working together. And I said I wanted 50% of everything. And she was like, oh, okay. And I drafted this little document that kind of spoke about it. And she disappeared for a while. And I remember getting a phone call from somebody, and they said, hi, this is so-and-so's lawyer. And I was like, oh. And he said to me, how can you ask for these kind of onerous terms in your document? And I said to him, well, to be honest, I don't have an idea. I don't know how to find out what to ask. And I was just trying to do what was fair. And that sort of led me on the path of trying to understand where the balance existed. So what was fair? What was right for a musician or musicians working together at the end of the day? There wasn't a lot of workshops back even in that time. So in other words, when you're interested in it and you look around what's available to find out certain information, there were very few and far between. And the people that often did have this information kept it very privileged because it kept them in power in some ways. And that was one of the things, that stopped the industry from growing. And there was a whole legacy issue behind that as well. So a lot of this information just wasn't available. So I got interested in it, and I, booked a session with an attorney back then, and spent a lot of money. For me at the time, it was a lot of money just to book 1 hour with an attorney. And I asked him very nicely, may I record it? And he said he didn't have a problem, because in his opinion, it was information that was very generic in some senses, and it was just not really out there. So And that attorney, Mark Friedman, I consulted with many, many times after that. And he even helped me with later editions of the book. I see you've got the first edition, which is the black cover. Then the second
and the
edition.
second one, and I understand there's a third one already.
Yes. So the white one is the second, and now the red one. I don't know what the fourth one's going to be. And whether it'll be physical is another question. Everybody's asking me for the PDF.
It's becoming a flag.
Might be multicolored and very rainbow.
Building the South African flag. Just
yeah, who knows? So that's what happened, is that I went and spoke to him, and he explained it all very, very nicely. It was still very new to me, and this was happening probably around the end of high school for me, if I remember correctly. And I was just a bedroom musician at that point. I've moved up. I'm slightly further than a bedroom musician at the moment, but I still run a home studio, and albeit sort of more jacked up than it was then. And that's how the book kind of came about. Is I started researching all of this and giving workshops myself, and it was a way of staying in the industry. So it allowed me to connect with people and make connections and understand it myself. And the feedback I got from people that went to those workshops. And when I went to did sound engineering, the college that I learned at and eventually lectured at in entertainment business, they would call it, that allowed me to start developing notes. So I just started writing out basic notes in Word, and that led to finally getting a structure in place. And during this time, at that time, I'd gone through university. So I'd started writing basic notes, and I was starting to lecture part-time after university. So that's 3 years after high school now. And I was still figuring things out myself. And it was surprising at how difficult it was to find the information that was out there. So then lecturing there and then lecturing part-time at Wits University, I started just developing notes. And then at university and lecturing there, where people were coming on a course in music business, we had set a textbook by Donald Passman called All You Need to Know About the Music Business. And that textbook, the students found, was too international. They said it didn't apply locally. And I agreed with them. I mean, a lot of the principles were there, but it just wasn't speaking to how things were. So eventually, with all the notes and all the background and all the books that I had collected and researched on, and all the encouragement that people were saying, hey, we need something local, I finally put it all together and compiled it all. It started as a marketing book. And I was lecturing at another college, and we compiled this little book. And so got that started. And then eventually I added the sort of legal component and the management side of it to that marketing textbook, and it created a more holistic idea of what one needed to know. And then that has just sort of grown ever since into a 400, I think it's 500 odd pages now, of textbook that I've been working on ever since. And I've got notes for a 4th edition. And as I say, so hopefully there'll be another one out. And digital, I think that's the way to go. The main problem with digital is revenue stream. So in other words, there's not a lot of money in it. So if it goes digital, I'll probably make about the same as the physical version, but that's where everybody's going. And then you would work on getting people to buy the digital copy. And even then, me thinking ahead, I don't personally think that books are going to be the way of the future. I think I'd rather invest in a knowledge environment. So whether it's through, I know there's various different platforms like Udemy and that sort of thing, where you can rather create a knowledge environment that people subscribe to. So you can dive into a particular aspect or take a whole course, and as opposed to having this singular tome of knowledge, it's rather a dynamic and constantly changing environment that you can have videos connected to and multimedia and all of those things. And I think that's more the way of the future, and just something that I'm looking to develop further. How it's going to be done, I don't know at this point. So that's where the book came from. That's what inspired to do all the research.
Wow. Yeah.
Can I just ask a question quickly? Understanding that does the editions build on one another? I mean, or are you expanding on the same themes that you're going? Sorry, I haven't I haven't read the book yet. My English, but are you covering the same body of work and you're just basically expanding as the landscape changes?
Yes. So there is a basic structure, and this basic structure has stood the test of time. The second edition lasted about 6 to 7 years before I updated it. And now with the third edition, it's a 2017. So 18, 19, 20, 21, we're sitting in the fourth year, so maybe in the fifth year. So the structure of the book is rather concrete. The basics are there. How the industry moves with digital and how COVID has affected things, all of these things will play a role in updating the book later. But it is an expansion. And oftentimes, so between the second edition and the third edition, for example, in the second edition, the digital environment was a chapter on its own. It sat outside of everything else, and it just touched on how things were changing. And with the third edition, that digital chapter now is an intro to digital. And all of that digital information now starts from the start of the book, from supply chains right through into copyright, management, marketing. It is a part of how the industry functions. So it's again rethinking about how those particular topics are introduced. So every edition expands and adds a little bit more about how the industry has moved and changed.
Yes. Now, maybe just a bit of backstory, Jonathan. I discovered your course way back, I think it was 2008 or 2009. Wow. And I couldn't believe that there was something like this out there. And thank you so much for writing this book, by the way. But I remember even, this is kick-ass, man. So even from school days, I just had this need, and this was before the days of internet. Where do you get information about the music industry? So I would go to CNA and I would buy these very expensive magazines, SOS magazines, Sound on Sound, and so forth, just to kind of get an idea. But obviously that was the UK kind of version. But when I discovered your course at WITS, and I was just blown away that for the first time now there is information available about the music industry that anybody can access. It's not privileged, as you said, but it's out there. So just a little bit of a backstory. I forgot my certificate, by the way. I wanted to bring it along today. I'll send it to you. But anyway, just a disclaimer, I did make it, if I remember correctly. It was quite a tough course, but brilliant stuff. And I remember the very first session or lesson, Jonathan, and that's a question as well, and it's also the very first pages of your book. Listen, is this thing about art or is it about business? And I believe you are actually busy venturing into your PhD.
Yes.
Along those lines.
So one of the opportunities that came out of the book. So, again, this is all just me finding ways to make a living out of what I love, just staying close to it. And that's not easy by any means, whether you're a musician or even a cultural entrepreneur for that matter. And one of the opportunities that came out of it is that when I was conferencing and I was actually running a stand at a conference, somebody from government approached me and they said, would you do policy development? And this was just out of the blue. And it was just something I was interested in. And they were needing somebody to look at policy development. So I attended, gone through all the processes and finally got that policy development. And that, again, informed the book later on. So by me having that opportunity and being allowed to sit down and actually go and literally be hands-on in the field, researching the industry, it allowed that information to even further flourish. And so I got interested in policy development. So that particular project was for Gauteng. So the Gauteng strategic framework for music. I was the one who went and we did the research and wrote the strategy and all of that. And then later on, I did Eastern Cape, similar sort of thing, but working with guys in the Eastern Cape. And then I moved to national. and I did research for a national music strategy. But their strategy itself, I wasn't a part of, and apparently it didn't go anywhere. And what has happened many years later, and I'm talking now a couple of years ago, is that research was finally recognized in the new white paper for the arts and culture industry. So that was revised a few years ago, and finally that research and its recommendations made its way into that white paper, which is not, it's more discussion paper than it is policy. But I mean, it's quite interesting that government still does not have a major arts policy. The biggest industry that has the most focus is film. And why? Because it creates lots of jobs. Music struggles. Why? Because it's individualistic. It speaks to the individual. If you support one musician, maybe 5 people will benefit from it. Whereas films, those credits that roll at the end of the film, it's 500 people at the end of the day that have a job. So they've put a lot more effort into that than, say, music. But music is more, it's got its own benefits for support because it's on a far more ground roots level. But that's, anyway, the policy discussion that could go on. So by me doing that, I got interested in then furthering my academics, because I'd done a BCom and I'd done an honors degree, and that's what led me into WITS and allowed me to go and lecture at WITS and carry on courses there. And then years later, I wanted to actually go and do a Bachelor of Music. So I applied for it at UNISA, and they said no. Even at, it was 34 I was. Even at a mature learning age, I couldn't even do a BMUS because I didn't have a grade 5 UNISA or whatever, or Trinity or, Royal Schools or any of that. And that let me down. I was like, okay, fine, I'm going to have to go and concentrate on that. And the decision then was to go and do a master's at WITS in cultural policy and management. And I looked again at music, and I did a massive thing on what's called music discovery. So my interest was, how do people find new music? Because that interests me. Great. People are making music, but they're not getting discovered. So that was my interest. And I found that YouTube was the biggest way to discover new music. So if you're not on YouTube, your chances of actually being discovered are halved. That's, one just takeaway from that particular research. And now that's moved to TikTok. So if you're not on TikTok, your chances of music being discovered are again halved. And that might be a revelation to people and the older generation who are making music that now, oh no, I have to learn something else. So, and my advice for TikTok is you need 3-second videos, because people just scroll through and they're usually looking for laughs. But the point is, if something goes viral on TikTok and they embed your music, it's instantly accessible for people to listen to and purchase. And that's the way stars are being made, is through viral distribution on TikTok. So I finished my master's then in cultural policy and management, and I actually went on to research Botswana. And I worked with a firm there that did the culture and creative industry strategy for Botswana. So I'm very much involved in the policy development side of things, which ties in with management. And it really does ask the question of, how do you support, or how does government support the arts? And so now, I mean, coming back to your original question about art and business, I had the thought of, yes, I can go and finally do my BMUS. And for the last 2 years, I've been working on getting my grades finally. So I'll get the music theory grade 5. And I came across some interesting research that I wasn't aware of. Now, this is literally within the last decade, where they've started looking at something called artistic research. And I thought, this is interesting. What the heck is artistic research? And this was now in my pursuit of saying, well, what if I applied for a PhD in music and I focused on what I love, because otherwise I'm not interested in taking it further, because I don't feel like I want to go into policy as a doctorate. I'm a musician. That's actually what I am. And there's all these other things which take up my peripheral view about work and life. But ultimately, I'm a musician, and I want to study that. And so I thought, well, why not be cheeky and apply for a PhD in music and literally do some sort of record production as a PhD. And it might sound strange at first, but it all ties together. Why? Because artistic research is this very, very new subject about art as knowledge. And when I did my BCom, I was told that I had to prove that music was a business. So when I first did an essay on music as a business, my lecturer said, but is music really a business? And I think she was just challenging me at the time. But it was quite an interesting thing, because on the BCom side, they saw music as an art. It held no commercial value. Whereas we all know, and it's quite a silly thing to even address today, that music is a business. It's a very big business. But now, if you run to the other side of campus, and that's what I did, and I spoke to them about having a degree course in business, music business, and they said, no, that's too commercial. Try West Campus, where they do business sciences. They weren't interested in it either, because why? It was too art. So I immediately found this conundrum quite, right from the beginning. And so by me doing this sort of from BCom to Doctor of Music, I'm almost making the statement of, but the two are not necessarily separate. And as a practitioner, I'm creating art, and I should be able to express that art as knowledge. And so the heart of the PhD is that argument, art versus business. So what I've called it is artistic research in commerce, which again is quite an interesting, it's an eyebrow raiser, because if somebody goes, if you can picture the people in the Faculty of the Arts going, but we don't do commerce. Yet artistic research is interdisciplinary. That's what they talk about it. So you can, for example, take paleontology and mix that with fine art, where the guys go and draw dinosaur bones and they learn from the paleontologists. Okay? And that's what artistic research crosses. And all I'm saying is that there's a big commercial component to art, which, yes, it's controversial, but that's why I'm doing the degrees, because I want to understand how the two fit together. How can I, want to make business? And most of the time, the arts qualifications are at odds with business, because now they're training up artists, but they need to exist in a world of work. And that's where most artists find themselves. They don't know how to make money, how to sustain themselves, how to plan for the future, how to make art that exists within commercial interests. If you think of graphic designers, and most of the time they get employed by advertising agencies, they're drawing, they're making art for commercial purposes. And so that's why I said that question became fundamental. It wasn't just the start of the textbook or even a start of a course. It's really the fundamental question about how art interacts in the wider world. And if you start to ignore business just because it's art, I think that you're also walking a fine line in that you're starting to ignore something which is very, very critical. So I hope that answers the question there. But that was, for me, it became this big arc back, this big circle back to where it all began.
Fantastic. Listen, what a lovely loophole.
Jonathan, I'm very aware that... say again?
I hope so, because it is a risk that I have applied for the PhD to do commerce in music. I'm half expecting them to reject me, and maybe tune in again the next episode when I know next month whether they say yes. Because the other side of the story is I'm not a qualified musician. I don't have a Bachelor of Music. So what I in essence said to them is, hey, I've got all the technical background. I can work. I've worked in Pro Tools my whole life. You could argue about all the other ones if you wanted to get into the technical side of things. And I mean, I've worked with, I'm a mixing and mastering engineer. That's what I do every day. And, then I do record production, and yes, then I lecture, and then I write books, and then I do policy development. The one thing I'm lacking is the actual formal qualification in music. And my argument was that a musician can go and further their studies by studying music as a business. In other words, you can do you can do your undergrad in music, but then your honors you can go and do in music business. Your masters you can go and do in music business. So why can't I, knowing everything about music business, and maybe I finally reached a point that I can say, look, I know a thing or two. Yeah. Why can't I go study music as a PhD? And that is what's cheeky, is me saying, hey, I've done it all the opposite way around, and now I'm bringing it home. If they say no, maybe I'll go and study a BMUS or do something else. It's just an interesting way of describing how it's all come together.
Jonathan, I have an interesting story, if I may just add to this. I did my undergrad in science, and grew up in a house where both my parents were performing musicians, and basically they ran 2 music schools from my house, and I resisted the temptation to step into the trap. But eventually, during my undergrad years, I ended up spending every single day in the conservatorium, and there was one woman who had at foresight, and eventually they invited me to do an interdisciplinary master's in music shared between electronic engineering and the conservatorium in Stellenbosch. Yeah. So your whole story, what you're telling is, I've been faced with that whole dilemma, how it was frowned upon for a science student to suddenly be accepted in a postgrad program in music. I was always, I was the odd one out, and this was always, but I'm so resonating with what you're saying. I don't know if you've read the book by, I think it's Moses Avalon, Confessions of a Record Producer.
I've heard about it. I haven't actually got it.
A lot of what you've said now, that guy, it's an American guy, and he writes under a alias, is that the right word? He writes under a scale name. But he kind of, exposed the American record industry and, the business, the business side of things that unfortunately the artists are almost unaware of. And
that's just another resource. And I'm so glad. I want to know your story. I'm actually going to say, please send me your dissertation so I know what it is. But it's just another example of what I'm hoping will happen. Another one is that I know a fine artist who crossed fine art with anthropology and had to go and do all the anthropological studies. And her final dissertation was in taxi hand signs, right? As anthropology drawn by a fine artist. And that is, again, a fantastic example of how the two realms can interconnect. And I'm just hoping that the commerce side doesn't scare them off.
Yeah. So is this even a fair question? If you had to take a snapshot of what does the music industry currently looks like, is that a fair question? And if it is, how would you summarize the current landscape?
A snapshot of what it's like at the moment. I feel it's a very dark hole to be in at the moment. just speaking frankly, I think we were very much on the up and up before COVID. And I think with COVID and literally the destruction of the live music sector, I think we've been set back 10 years, to be honest. I feel that, yes, it has forced certain things to come out. So in other words, there's a lot more focus on digital now. And I think a lot more people are open to digital. It's killed CDs. So you've seen Musica close down. You see CD manufacturers teetering on the brink at the moment. And a lot of people still, a lot of musicians still think about CD as a format. But the awful truth is that CD is very much on its way out. I think you can, keep it as a special edition and a special, thing to include. But digital is where it's at. And in terms of the digital market, I mean, the latest statistics, it's the whole sector has gone 70% digital recordings. And I think that's even more significant in the sense that your live music has shrunk. It's now probably not even an eighth of what it was. Music publishing has doubled in the last year. So if we start talking about the separation between sectors, so recorded music is, if you think of the principal artists on the face of the, Spotify, let's put it that way, versus the live musician. I know a lot of guys who are out doing pub gigs, and that's sort of opened up, and weddings and so on. But club gigs, yeah, I think that still has a long way to go. Stadium gigs, not within the next year. So the sort of high end side of it is very much on its, still needs to be recovered. Whether we'll see vaccine certificates being required to get into larger venues for larger events, festivals, we've seen that in Europe. So I think it might be a thing here, but I think also there's a controversy just about having the vaccine. So I think there'll be a long recovery there. And music publishing, there's again a greater demand to include music within all types of media. So Netflix and all of these streaming video services have laughed all the way to the bank, because that's all people have done in the last year. So I think that's where we see the industry at the moment. And I think from a ground level point of view, where I run a small studio that was pumping before COVID, I had absolutely no problems and I was doing quite well. And I put my prices up. It's become a lot harder. I'm not having as many general inquiries. A lot of current clientele and corporate clientele have remained, but new clientele are very price sensitive. So you have to offer some sort of discounts. A lot of the market has moved to be time sensitive. So in other words, people want it out now. They want it out. And so I introduced rush rates for the first time in ever.
Wow.
So that's just how people have reacted.
I just want to make a note. Rush rates.
Rush rate.
That's important.
Did you coin the term as well?
and it's simply just, people saying to me that they need it tomorrow. And why do you think that I'm available now for you tomorrow? And people think that you have nothing to do because of COVID. Obviously, you need the work. So you're going to be, so that's just practical observations that I've made just being in the studio,
Yeah. Jonathan, I want to take things just back to the whole idea of a chain. And I asked you the question beforehand, before we set up this interview, because you talk in your book about the value chain, the industry value chain, what makes up the chain and what actually gives it its value. But then you replied to me, you said, all right, there's a value chain, but there's also a supply chain. And I think, as we said right at the start, many musicians or artists come into the music industry not having a clue how this thing works. Who are all the people involved, or all the what does the flow chart look like? So maybe just your thoughts on value chain, supply chain, and what makes up everything that you kind of described now. I know there's a complex one, but I know there's a simple one as well.
Yeah. So the story behind that is for the first edition of the book, for example, when I wrote that first edition, that was about 2005. The actual concept of value chain was fairly new. I didn't know that at the time. And a couple of years later, I did a consult where I was requested to examine value chains of the music industry. And through that, it gave me a far better sense of what a value chain and a supply chain were. And the basic understanding between the two was that a value chain was at product level. So you're talking about, let's say, to keep it simple, an artist recording a song in studio and putting it out. Everything that makes that recording better is the value chain. So in other words, whether you have better session musicians or a better producer or a better mix engineer or anything creative and technical that gets put together to make up that recording at the end of the day. That's what a value chain was, whereas supply chain was on an industry level. So now you're starting to talk about the people that are involved in the supply of goods and services in that sense. And so we break this down into the three sectors. So I think even the first edition of the book, you talk about the music industry as this big thing, whereas later on, the deeper understanding of it is that there's three major sectors, and we've spoken about them now. So live music, music publishing, which is all about the song. It has nothing to do with the recording. The recording is a user of the song. And then you have the recorded music sector, which is all about the artist and sound. And so, there's different value chains for each of those. So in other words, for live music, we would talk about stage setup and what the musicians do on stage and how lighting might contribute to the stage setup and who's supplying all of these things. Music publishing, you'll talk about the song and what makes a good song. And that's also very esoteric, because a song is not, what makes a good song. The only thing you have is really a historical precedent of a good songwriter. Somebody who's written many good songs is likely to write songs in the future that are good. And then the recorded music industry, we have one-off hits. We have a lot of different varieties of music. Billie Eilish, I can't remember. I think it's Eilish. And a lot of artists who are bedroom artists suddenly becoming, famous and stuff that they've made themselves has been accepted, and that can be a lucky break. So it's like playing the lottery to win in that sense. But the recording industry, you can talk about recording studios, and it's all these different, as opposed to functions, which is more value chain, and role players, which is more supply chain. But that's how we break it down, And if we talk about an overview of the industry that has all the elements in it, it all starts with the song or a song. Now, if you start talking electronic music, and the big genre at the moment is amapiano. And what is amapiano? And that's sort of an offshoot of hip hop and house, in the sense that it's minimal electro music that has, a basic beat. And I suppose it's some offshoot of Qom. I don't know if you've heard of Qom music, and that was named because of the kick drum that they used, and it just went Qom, 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 Qom. There's also very minimal electro. Where's the song? Where's the song? And as a traditional producer, in some senses, where I might work with somebody who's written a song, and then I have to figure out all the instruments that go with that. If somebody said they wanted an amapiano song, okay, pull in a kick drum. But you get producers, which are more DJs now, and they're creating beats. And then you have MCs or singers or melodic rappers even. I mean, what the heck is a melodic rapper? It's a guy that pretty much sings in a pentatonic scale on a rap song and raps lyrics along to it. And that's what a melodic rapper is. So it's almost like a very, very, I would say archaic, but it's also a new style, this trap style. I mean, it's just nuts how these electronic genres are moving. And that's because people have access to things like FL Studio and cracked software, and they're making hits out of stuff that a normal person would go, how do you create anything that sounds good with these things? And it calls into question the whole idea of having a big studio. I did well in a time where big studios were suffering. In other words, people weren't booking them out. Your downtown studios and your big studios, these SABC studios and all of this, and they were not being booked because they got booked because people wanted the glam of a big studio. Whereas the actual fact is that you can have nowadays, I mean, it's absolutely insane that you can have a laptop with a really good interface, and you're pretty much mobile, and you can go anywhere and make music and do what you need to do. My whole goal in the future is actually to go mobile with my setup. So no matter where I am, I still carry on as if I had a studio, because it's become like, in essence, like that. So now people are knowing, and COVID hasn't helped the situation, because all the voiceover artists that I worked with before COVID, what did they do? They went and bought mobile studios, and they have them sitting in a room at home, and they've decked out the room, and now they've got their own mics and they do all their ads at home. And it's killed any business I might have had from an advertising agency or purpose. And I have to retool. And I suppose some people might say, oh, that's very scary. And other people say that's great opportunity, to do different things. And I just see it as if you don't, that's why we understand supply chains and value chains. Because when I got into this, and I was saying to everybody, we need to understand this in the terms of more generic terms of creator who sits and makes things. I'm a piano beat maker who's sitting at home and making beats after work every day. That's a creator. And then it works with an enabler, somebody who's able to take that work and polish it and put it and make it available for the public. That's really what an enabler is. And we might have referred to something like a record label in the past. But that record labels are also no more. The traditional idea of a record label is very romantic, but misguided. It's gone. There are no more record labels left. They are essentially called artist service companies now. And, anybody can do aggregation. So now moving into the next part, which is an enabler. A revealer, we call them. So anybody who allows market access is a revealer. And they allow us to see the market in different ways. So a digital aggregator, an online store, YouTube, social media, they're all revealers. And then the people that sit between these different categories and they help the whole thing sit together are called facilitators. So, if we talk about Samro, for example, Samro collects royalties from, say, radio for songwriters, not artists, not principal artists on a recording, for songwriters. So they all deal with radios, who is a revealer, and they will pay the music publisher, who's an enabler, and the songwriter, who's a creator. Now, if we start thinking in those generic terms, we will see changes in the industry very quickly, because we'll talk about function, not role player. And this helps us understand how things are changing very, very quickly. And that's why you would send people off to go and do studies at university, because that's the only place that they'll get exposed to that sort of high level knowledge or thinking. Not high level, but it's how knowledge is created and developed and changed is a university function. And we can talk about the role of a university in a digital age. You can go and do an entire course in music theory online. I've got, stuff that I've collected just doing that. And nobody needs to enroll anymore. You just, the only aspect of it is actual doing. How do you do things? And that's where examination comes into the picture. So if you can do an exam on something and prove that you understand it, that's the worth at the end of the day. Knowledge is no longer confined to a university. You can get podcasts on everything. There we go. People just watching this podcast suddenly had, lecture 101 of a music business qualification. And, if you're taking notes and are serious about learning this stuff, it makes it quite easy. But it also helps us understand how the industry is changing when you go in those terms. And like I said, people wanted to know about revenue streams. And we had an argument about revenue streams. And I said to them, revenue streams haven't changed. We're still making money the same way. What has changed? Your business model. You're employing the way you make business in a different way. And so collecting the gazillions of ideas about how to make money, revenue streams, versus in giving people the tools to retool themselves. Like I said now, every musician can now sit in their bedroom and make music and it could potentially have a hit. You need to tool them on how they can do that on their own. They're not assisted by a music producer anymore. And how do you then make that accessible to them? That, for me, is a more important and critical question to look at.
Wow. Yeah. Jonathan, I love where this is going. I'm just aware of the time as well. So we got about two more questions.
what's fascinating for you guys that you wanted to ask?
Well, yeah, my mind is spinning so badly now. I'm thinking we should really have a follow-up session.
Yeah, man.
Which would really be exciting. But let's land it with an easy one. No, maybe it's not an easy one, but a very relevant one. You're describing such a fast-changing and complex landscape. For a newcomer in the industry, where do you start just to get a grip on what is going on?
Yeah, a very relevant question. And I'll take it back to my own experience. I wish I had been forced by my parents to go and do piano in school. I wish I had that. I never had that. And some people are so privileged to be able to have the pain of having to learn an instrument. And I think step one is tools of the trade. If you are going to be in music, the biggest advice I can give you is to be very, very fast. And I think people take it for granted that either they have the skills to do things very quickly. And I was lucky in the sense that I got computers very, very quickly. And I grew up in an age where I started with a monochrome, and my dad brought a monochrome computer home. A monochrome, for people that don't know, the iPad people, that was literally a green screen. It was in green at that stage. And I had fun trying to make pictures out of typing on a keyboard. And I can type very, very fast. And I'm not inhibited about the way that I type. So step one is to know your instrument, and that's, I think that's also often what people want, is that when they approach me to say, come and record, and I say to them, have you gone for music lessons? Are you going for vocal coaching? Often their answer is no, I just had a song that I wanted to sing. And there's no concept of development. So in other words, they don't know that there's open mic nights and I think that's what South Africa lacks quite apparently, is that there is no development from an artist who wants to start. The first place they think of is going to a recording studio and recording. And I don't as somebody who works in that space, I don't feel that is the way to go. Whereas in the US, in Europe, there's far more stepping stones that people understand and intrinsically understand that if I want to be a singer, I need to go for lessons, and I need to start singing at open mics and on stage somewhere. And studio is not the first place to go. And people just sort of see the studio idea as the first step. And then, I suppose building upon that, when we're talking about a well-rounded musician that can exist in a space, I see it as three things. So the first is what I've mentioned, is understanding your instrument. So it's music theory, it's performance. And I think people also believe that it's quick gains. So in other words, these guys that are making computer music, they don't believe that they need to expand beyond click, click, and go any further than that. And they believe it's easy. So, if we go back to the 80s and even the 1800s, where virtuosity was a worthy goal, if you couldn't shred on the guitar in the 80s, you weren't, you didn't have anything. And that took a long time. Nowadays, we live in the X generation, the Y generation, where they all believe it's simple and it's quick. And I think, given that music has sort of had that arc of coming back to simplicity, over the next, 10 to 20 years, you're going to see it again move back to virtuosity. But virtuosity in the sense of computer music. So the computer is your instrument. Understand that to the big degree. So that's music theory, performance. Then music technology is the next aspect within that. So being able to understand the technology and how things fit together. And then finally, the music business aspect of it. And that is what I believe are the four building blocks of what qualifications exist, and essentially what a musician needs to be able to get under their belt to be able to exist in a as a career, at least in the industry.
Jonathan, absolute gold nuggets you're just throwing at us. Thank you for that.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's so great. So and I think let's end off with this, because for me, this was a fantastic starting point. Having something in my hand, and please make the next edition physical as well for the older people.
We'll have to do it blended. So that's what the latest edition looks like.
All right, it's the red one.
It's phasing. It's phasing in and out, but it's the red one.
I'll edit in there we go. Brilliant stuff. So where can people find the latest edition of the South African Music Business?
Well, the sad story goes that I had an incredible publisher who emigrated. So she landed up in the UK just before COVID hit. And during COVID, the distributor closed down. So it used to be distributed nationally. And so we're working to rebuild that national distribution. And I have somebody who's at least got it into certain stores like Bargain Books and Estrol and some exclusive books and so on. And I've been selling it with national delivery. So the one thing about COVID is that couriers have flourished. So everything from Uber Eats to Mr. D to, that's the new booming business. So I offer national delivery with the book, autographed. And there's a website called the South African Music Business.info. The South African Music Business.info. I know it's a long URL, but the book is called The South African Music Business, and I can send it to you nationally to your door these days. And so that's the easiest way to get the book. But sad story about how things have changed, and I'm still reeling about what does the future hold and how to get a grip on doing whatever I'm doing. Yeah. So go and check out the book on that website.
Absolutely. And what we'll do is at the bottom of this video as well, we'll put all your links and the link for the book as well. So, and I really want to encourage, that's what this podcast is all about. It's about inspiring, supporting, equipping, and just, helping the music community out there to
guys,
know what's happening.
Amazed. I'm privileged to be able to chat to you. So thank you so much.
No, from my side as well, Jonathan, this was amazing. And the insight literally sparks the idea that we should do this probably more regular. And there's a whole list of questions that we didn't even get round to. So I look forward to a B part of this conversation. And then, just from us.
I didn't talk too much, but we covered a lot.
No. That's it's gold.
I tried to be honest about how I was feeling about how everything is at the moment,
Yes, and thank you. That authenticity and the honesty is exactly, I think, what we need. So, Jonathan, thanks. We'll definitely catch up with you again. And if you're watching this video, if you listen to this podcast, please like it, share it, and let's spread the word of the business of music in this country. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan.
So much, Lucas and Helmut.